In today's What Students Want podcast, we're talking about LGBTIQA plus engagement. What? Shouldn't we be doing that in Pride Month, I hear you say? Well, no. Today we're going to be discussing how universities can build authentic community engagement all year round in a way that's meaningful and genuine. And who better to join me than Vanessa Varvas, Chief Marketing Officer at the University of East London, Peter Simpson-Leek, Web and Digital Marketing Manager at the University of Bedfordshire, and Alex Causton, Head of Education and Marketing at PS London. Okay, let's start with a little vent. As much as I love Pride Month and celebrating our communities, it can sometimes feel like companies are exploiting us for a feel-good win and not actually talking to us. So an example that stands out for me, I was driving, I was taking my son to nursery, and there was a massive advert from HSBC, and it was two women in wedding dresses kissing, and it said, "Love has no borders." And I looked at it and thought, oh, God, they've missed an opportunity here. Are they trying to talk to me, or are they trying just a virtual signal to the world that, they're being diverse in their marketing? They could have said something like, prepare for the moments that matter, or, be financially stable for the moment, whatever. But it just felt like it was a really big tick box exercise. And I thought, they're not actually engaging with the community. They're just doing it, to show how good they're being from a diversity point of view. Anyhow, that's my vent. And Pete, I'm going to come to you first. Have you got anything you want to get off your chest in that regard?
Well, regarding HSBC and your point, I think they do sponsor Birmingham Pride quite massively. But I get your point that sounded like it was a bit shoehorned into their, anti-Brexit campaign. So I think we're right there with the messaging not being right. A random one from 2021, this stands out because I saw it on Twitter. Hornby Railways, they make the little models. They had made a Pride train and they tweeted out to say, "Celebrate Pride Month with our Pride train." And then somebody tweeted them back and said, "Are you putting any of the proceeds from this product into the communities?" And they said, "No, not at this point, but we're reviewing that." And then suddenly they did a 360. And by the end of the week, I remember this story breaking, by like the Friday, this has gone out on Monday, they were giving 100% of the profits to LGBT communities and charities. And I thought, hang on, you didn't need to give 100%. You just need to give a percentage and say you were doing something. And also, how's a little model train going to help me celebrate Pride Month? Because am I going to have it on a shelf in my house? Everyone comes around already knows I'm gay. I don't need to have a little train on the shelf to say, "Hey, I'm celebrating Pride Month." It just seemed a bit random, and a random brand to be kind of doing that.
That is a good one. Vanessa, anyone spring to mind for you?
Well, I have quite a different view on this because I come from actually visibility is a very good thing. Whilst I think it can be gimmicky, and I agree, sometimes you cringe at some of the things. I actually think, I don't know if anybody else has watched the Apple series Visible, and actually how visibility makes such a big impact to changing the normative discussions. And whilst I actually take this as a different view, whilst I do get a little frustrated people jumping on the bandwagon, I actually think we need to reflect on this on a maturity level of organizations joining from I actually think Pride Month is a very easy, quick win for organizations to visibly show support. But actually, when you look at the maturity scale, there's a lot of things, and actually organizations like HSBC do a lot underneath the surface. But actually, I think it is looking at their maturity levels of that. Yeah, that's a quick win. But the more and more visibility is out there, I actually look at it as, and I'm going to go into my personal, my mom, the first thing she thought was, I'm not going to be employable because I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community. But with the businesses coming out there, not being afraid to be visible about it and actually really promoting it, I actually think that's a positive thing. But I think there's a lot more steps that maybe we can go into a little bit further within that, and in particular in the good practices to show examples to other companies that actually that short-wind PR like or slogan or cringe, don't make a big deal of it. Just put it as part of your regular marketing. That normalizes it, doesn't make it as you mentioned, Marcella, this kind of cringe kind of slogan that we kind of walk away with.
Yeah. And I feel like I might have thrown HSBC under a bus there, which I didn't mean to do. It was just exactly what you said. You can market and have same-sex couples and members of the community without making it explicit in the messaging that you're doing that. And Alex, I'd love to hear your kind of feedback on this.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me. So I think staying within financial services, I think the one that really stuck out for me in probably the way that Vanessa was talking about just then was in the normalization of the idea of same sex. So it was Lloyd's TSB, and it was For the Moments That Matter. And it was a series. I was walking down a road in London. There was a series of phone boxes, and it was all these different moments between a mother and their daughter, etc. And then there was just two men hugging with "He said yes," and it was just one in a series. And I just went, "Yeah, cool."
They got it right.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just that there was a fine line, or is that there's that balance that brands need to strike between action and support and listening to the community before trying to communicate with them, versus the idea of normalization within the media narrative. And I think where that your HSBC example there, Marcella, I think didn't get it was that idea of love has no boundaries, borders or what have you, because it was specific. Look at us, we are supporting this, rather than this idea of entering the mainstream narrative and showing different families, different individuals, and different ways of life. And so by having that sort of fine line between the two of, right, as brands and as communications professionals, we have such a responsibility towards the LGBT community and other marginalized communities to represent their stories and their ways of life, so that it becomes part of the mainstream narrative and the norm. So I think, all of the examples there are so right and interesting in their own way. And I think that at the moment there isn't a golden bullet or silver bullet, golden whatever, but it's good to see brands trying, but just whacking a rainbow on something in June isn't enough.
And thanks for highlighting someone that's doing it well. I haven't seen that particular campaign, but I'm going to be Googling that after this. Vanessa, just going back to that kind of normalization, and are there any brands that you've seen that are doing it well, or any campaigns that stand out?
Yeah, I enjoyed going back and getting ready for this podcast and looking through a number of companies. And actually, I learned a few things about that. And I think it's actually really important that we do have more and more benchmark qualifications for organizations to teach them, for those that are at the lower maturity end. What I'm looking at is actually intersectionality as a whole, not just LGBTQ+, because we're one element of intersectionality. But I thought some of the campaigns that came out, it was actually Coca-Cola, and what they do. They get I was looking at some of the other ratings other than Stonewall, 100% on human rights campaigns. And they do a lot for the transgender communities, particularly around making sure their health insurance is inclusive, that they're running multiple campaigns. They do a lot to fight in certain states across the states to fight against anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment. IBM, another one, they were really early adopters in adapting their policies. They created a LGBTQ plus, so I'm going to say plus just because it becomes like a little bit of messes you up when you're in sentence. But they created actually a council that really fought against HIV discrimination. Another one was PayPal, Adobe's campaign of Adobe for All. But then when I went back into UK particularly, and I've actually had some personal connection to this, was actually Linklaters, which is one of the big top legal firms. And what I thought with them, and they're in the top 10 actually in the Stonewall rating. So I started to look at more, what did they do to become into that top 10? But I think where they escalated as well was one of their partners was part of the community. And I actually knew her through the Gay Women's Network. But she actually was able to put the icing on the cake and really become a sponsor for what the company was trying to do and connect to the wider communities across the city. And so they really sponsor a lot of the big talks, the visibility, they call it love, divorce, discrimination kind of series that actually a lot of companies go to and a lot of other HR companies go to, advice and guidance. So I just thought, actually, by going in and seeing what some of the organizations are doing, I think there is a piece of work that needs to be done. What does good practice on engagement look like?
Yeah, those examples sound great. And then it's often the way with social media that it all just comes in general. You have somebody in the community or in their area, and they do that so well for the business. But often it's kind of bolted on, or, Pride Month comes and here we go. Here's our community engagement. Pete, how in kind of your role and kind of within your life, what advice would you give to companies or institutions to actually embed it throughout the year as opposed to just thinking about it at Pride Month?
Well, back in 2020 at Bedfordshire, we had a new social media assistant start, and he said to me, "Right, I'm going to put the rainbow logo on for Pride Month." And I said, "No, we're not going to do that because we can't actually back up that we're doing anything." And at that point, we really weren't. There may have been a few student union-led events throughout the year for the LGBT plus network for students, but that was it. And certainly for staff, not much was happening. So from there, we got an LGBT network organised. So it's a staff network that also works with the student union. For example, we did a great collaborative event a couple of weeks ago where we had drag bingo at the SU. It was a great event. But we've got rainbow lanyards. But they're not just signs of tokenism, though. We're actually really working towards delivering, outcomes. And one of them is we do a radio show on our student radio station. I present it. And we've actually had students come up to us. We did a live one for History Month. We did it live from the student union. And we had students come up to us and say, "I listen to your show every week and it really helps me. I feel like I've got a friend. I feel like I've got an ally." And talking of allies, so important within an organisation to have allies and for allies to know the terms that they're saying and to know what kinds of things could be seen as offensive or what issues their LGBT plus colleagues may face that they don't, and they don't have an understanding. So we've started ally training around the university as well. So we're making these quite big strides quite quickly. And now I feel comfortable enough saying to our social media guy, "Yeah, we can put a rainbow logo on, do it," because we have got those things to back up to say we are supporting our colleagues, we are supporting our students.
Fantastic, Pete. I'm gonna be listening to that on my drive home, 100%. What about UEL, Vanessa? Kind of what are you guys doing in this area?
But I think I'm going to go back to that intersectionality piece because I think there is a bit about what is the organization as a whole doing for that piece and equity amongst all the protected characteristics and all the different groups and particularly, so I'll bring out then the LGBTQIA, what we've been doing in it. But I'll go back to when I joined in 2018, we were at the bottom of the Stonewall rating. And again, I'm not saying Stonewall rating is the be all end all, but it gives you something to benchmark where your performance was. And over the last 3 years, we now have got silver rating. We've got more to do. But part of what it did was give us an action list of what things to do. And so then I became, in 2018-19, we reset up the network. And part of that was to get, and actually we had more allies at the beginning than we did actually part LGBTQ plus communities until it started to get more and more visibility and more exposure. But part of that action list was about actually having someone stand up, which was myself, and say, "Look, I'm a gay leader in the institution and I'm okay with that. And I want to be part of the voice for the LGBTQ plus communities." But alongside that, we embedded an Office for Institutional Equity. And this is what structures it for the organization. But I think, Peter, you went into a really nice summary in terms of there's a balance between, okay, great, it's embedded into all our policies and our action plans to make sure we're inclusive, to make sure trans training and a lot of the pronouns and a lot of these things that we've got action lists on. But I do think there's a bit about what we as a community do in our organizations to bring it to life. And what I've learned as being the executive sponsor is when I actually went to my executive board, management board, talked to the students, when I said, "Look, this is why we want to do this, and why this is the practice we're doing," they immediately signed up. So almost 90% of our executive board and board of governors have the pronouns in their signature and they understand why they're doing it. Most of them are wearing the visibility quite regularly, whether they're an ally or part of the community. And I thought like that power that started with actually leadership and our Vice Chancellor and President signing and putting on her Twitter that I'm an ally to support the requirements to make it an equitable environment for all was a big step that then allowed us to then go down that journey of doing an action plan. And so now actually in this place, we do have someone in the Office for Institutional Equity with extensive experience in the LGBTQ plus work. And actually now really structuring it to make sure that it's sustainable beyond those that are just so passionate because we're part of it, if you know what I mean. And I personally have made it as part of my marketing all year round, and making sure it is embedded into our social media, our content calendars, into our visibility alongside other parts of intersectionality.
Fantastic. And I think that it has to come from within, and in your case from the top, right? It's not just the students that are part of the communities, and as Pete mentioned, it's the staff as well. It's got to be kind of part of your core that you are visible, you are included. We did a piece of research and we had 120 students come back. They were part of the community, and we just asked them about their experiences, what they want from university comms, how they see it. And I'll never forget, there was one video interview we did, and the student came back and said, I didn't realise that universities had clubs and societies for LGBT plus. I didn't realise there were like spaces and people I could talk to. And I think for me, like, of course, it's like second nature. I know that all the universities have it. When I went to university, I was going out with the LGBT club and society every week. But a lot of prospective students don't even know that there are clubs and societies and the baseline support available. And Alex, I guess I'd like to come to you, like with your brand hat on, and I suppose we're akin in that we do a lot of marketing campaigns for universities. Like, how can we communicate that, particularly across kind of paid advertising channels?
Yeah, I suppose it's quite interesting because when you start to consider both central and core brand, and then you start to consider employer brand, it's quite an interesting conversation or piece to think about, especially when we're in this sort of glass box era, i.e. When a central brand communicates out, hey, we are LGBTQ plus inclusive, then you have the ability to, or people have the ability to go, are you actually though? And let's dig into this, because there's enough out there, be it Glassdoor, employee reviews, etc. And you can actually find out what's really going on very easily in a way that brand managers used to be able to control a lot more. Whereas now we don't necessarily have the same control over our brands that we used to. And so when it comes to actually how to integrate that into paid advertising or brand communications in general, it really does, in my experience, start from the ground up. Is actually, right, what does it mean to be an LGBTQ plus student or an LGBTQ plus member of staff at this institution? What is the lived experience that they have? And then how can we start to share that with the right people online and through any sort of the marketing channels? And so it's about it feeling natural and right. And that's the thing that when I'm working on brand strategies for universities, I never want to present something to a university executive and they go, well, oh, I never thought that. It should be, no, that's exactly right. Of course it's that. And that, again, needs to come through in the way that we're communicating to specific audience groups, and especially those LGBTQIA individuals. So, yeah, absolutely. There is a sense of, obviously you speak to them first. So, I've heard the joke, no gays were consulted in the making of this advert. It's that sort of, hey, fellow kids, we don't want to go down that route of trying to sort of talk to LGBTQ plus people unless there's at least someone in the room who's gone, maybe you shouldn't say that. I'm thinking, for example, during Pride Month a couple of years ago, M&S did a LGBT sandwich.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, I really don't think there was a member of the community in the room for that, because if they were... and so yeah, it's about conversation, it's about communication, it's about consultation.
Thanks, Alex. That's yeah, I remember those sandwiches well. And then you looked on the back and it barely donated anything to the community as well, but it was like rainbow everywhere. And
yep.
I don't know if they still do that. We'll find out in June. And so I think, to your point, Alex, I think it's fair to say universities are doing great things in this space, in giving support, in all the initiatives, Pete, as you mentioned, that you're doing. It's how do we surface that information? How do we get that out to prospective students? And Pete, I'd love to know, with all that you're doing, how do you communicate that to prospective students currently?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of live content on our socials. So every time we're running an LGBT plus event, we've got our social media guy there. He's putting it out on our Insta, he's tweeting about it. But also, we are getting involved in the community outside of the university. So we're building up some partnerships. We're based in Bedford and Luton, both of which have got pride movements going on. Luton never really had a pride until a couple of years ago. We are now working with them to make sure we can have visibility there. So when people are looking, going, what's the gay scene like in Luton? You know, would I fit in? Well, actually, they're Googling it, will come up as a partner, because we want to support these things. We've been letting out our Bedford campus to LGBT groups so they can come and meet at the weekend and have their meetings there. So we're doing things outside of the university as well. So it's that word of mouth, it's that visibility through their channels as well as our own channels. But also, I was at UCAS now a couple of weeks ago in Manchester, and I was wearing my rainbow lanyard, and someone came up to me, and I noticed he had a little rainbow flag badge, and he was really shy, and he just said, "What's it like being LGBT at Bedfordshire?" Oh. And I guess he really felt like he could probably ask that, because back to what you've all said about disability, I was wearing this and felt comfortable enough in coming up and asking that question. So those small things as well, just that little bit of visibility, as well as what we would do on social media with our partners.
Yeah, and that's such a sweet story as well. And you probably made a real impact on that prospective student's decision just in that moment as well.
We'll find out in September.
Yeah. Come back and let us know. And just thinking about Pride, I think of all the universities, UEL's float always sticks out to me. You guys have a big party on that float at Pride. And I know you're doing absolutely loads when it comes to prospective student engagement. Would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, and I think it's not too dissimilar to Peter's. It's being visible across whatever communication channel that we're doing, and it's not only for the B2B but the B2C, and it's integrating that. Again, our kind of mission is around the EDI space, and so it is integrating that across everything we do. And so the Pride is a big thing for us, and it does help having a marketing budget underneath you to be able to support some of that. But it has been a big statement. But we also had, I even know, with that, because it came with a lot of communication plan. It was part of an annual plan that culminates in that. So it escalated, and we had a lot of alumni came that had nieces and nephews or cousins that came out as part of their community, and in the wider intersectionality that had challenges in coming out in some of those pieces. But I think it's also, as Peter said, using the student voice to actually say what's topical right now, and that actually we build into this wider culture of acceptance. And I think one of the biggest things I've taken in a lot of that commentary with our current students, prospective students, our alumni, our staff community, is that actually a lot of the topics is around fluidity. And actually, when we were sat down with our students, they just didn't want to be defined. Just let us be who we are and let us choose as we go, and don't put me in a box and don't make me. And actually, one of the biggest things for them, their biggest issue was how to record the senses, because they said, I'm not this and I'm not that, but I may be here, but I don't care. I just thought it was so different to the things that in my generation we grew up in. So really understanding that different generational challenges that we've been part of, and making sure that has been embedded into your content calendars, that actually for a lot of those coming in, it's not an issue for them, but they want to know that they're coming to a culture that does include them in their dialogue.
Yeah. Very interesting point about the fluidity, and I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. And just before that point, Alex, I'm sure we're both in a lot of media schedules, brand projects. How do we truly integrate this as part of something that's ongoing in a way that is normal?
So I think it's interesting when you consider all of the different, when you consider intersectionality and all the different areas of protected characteristics and marginalization. It is about understanding how to create a series that speaks to individuals while still considering the intersectionality involved as well. And within that, considering the fact that whilst you might, as you say, tick a certain amount of boxes, while there is still an incredibly different lived experience under every single one of those. And now when you start to consider all of the intersectionality at once, the amount of creatives you would need to create to speak to every single person out there would be somewhat difficult, I would imagine. And so it's about making sure that you have a consistent amount of diverse communications, that there is enough out there that people can start to see that people like themselves, or hear about stories from people like themselves in a way that isn't performative, in a way that isn't tokenistic, and in a way that is just deeply embedded. You know, coming back to that Lloyd's TSB, it was a series of ads about different people's and the experiences they have in their lives. Normalize it, bring it in, and make it natural, not waving a pride flag going, hello, fellow gays, want to talk? You know, there needs to be an amount of genuine consistency in the way that people are communicating this to people, whilst obviously still, when it comes to direct engagement with specific audiences, so when we're talking about the things that what's it like to be an LGBT student on campus, etc., that is going to require a specific communication, or just the ability for someone to find that information on your website, not specifically targeting LGBTQ people through paid advertising, and then trying to be like, look, we're good for the gays. You know, it needs to be a bit more sensitive than that, I would imagine.
Definitely. And I really like the idea of, it doesn't matter what page you're on or what social channel you're on, it just, all the messages that just filter through, and they might reach the communities, they might reach everyone, but that's okay. It's who you are, and it's important. And so just going back to the fluidity point, in the research we did, we spoke to a student at Loughborough, and they said, why do you need gender on forms? You know, they highlighted a lot of specific IT, shall we say, areas for improvement, that us as a collective, we'd be like, yeah, of course, no brainer, we could do that, we'd do it right away. But actually there's a lot of things underpinning things like websites that take a long time, they're structurally challenging. I suppose, Pete and Vanessa, coming to you guys, like how would or could you approach that at your institution?
That's all right. Because we ask for a gender or no gender, or, you know, so, you know, it's always that drop down, which one do I fit into? And we do that to fit into our student record system.
Yeah.
Why do we need it? I have raised that question. Nobody actually knows. It's like, well, we just need to know. So that is, you know, for stats, I don't know. It's a tricky one, isn't it? We have done a pronouns campaign recently at the university as well. We're also launching some cool video content soon called UBU, which is all about just being yourself and not necessarily labeling yourself. And I love that idea. I love that. But I think it's a massive challenge when it comes to the logistics. And actually, on a personal story, this is more of a kind of staff form, but I'm a same-sex parent, and I went through the adoption process. And to go through the adoption process and to take maternity leave because everything was gendered on the form, and I was classified as a mother. So that was a whole process, and I think I triggered that in around 2019, and HR did a big review of everything, you know, of all of their forms. And I think we probably just need to continue doing that, continue going, right, what are we asking here? Is this still relevant? Do we need to be talking? Do we need to gender, you know, adoption leave? No. So it's about, I guess, a constant review. And the same with our student record system, where, you know, asking for all of these selections on the drop down. Let's review it. Do we need to be doing that? I think we need to continually look back at these processes.
And I agree with Peter. The one thing, though, I think you've got to review, we can't underestimate that people do identify with being male and female and want to also tick that box. And I think taking that away also, when people associate with their gender, a lot of the time, that's still the majority of the population that still do that. But I do think where we can really lobby and change is the more flexibility of the options you can choose to identify how you identify yourself. And so I think there is a more of a role of lobbying, particularly because we are restricted, not with what we can do internally. Sometimes that's more easy, but what actually some of the regulatory bodies are saying that we, you know, with UCAS and how we actually, it starts there and then it gets filtered into our systems. And actually one of the outcomes in our Stonewall was exactly under this. Actually, the generations coming in want more flexibility of how they identify. but actually your next step is lobbying with government to be able to provide that flexibility within those that actually enter within our system from the beginning. So I think there is a bit about understanding that we're not excluding those that do strongly identify with their gender, but that we're adding more flexibility with those that identify differently, non-binary, binary, across the piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there were 30 kind of gender terms that are used, and probably more now. There's so much to consider, isn't there? Goodness, I could talk to you guys all day. I don't want this to stop. But I think it'd be great to round this up just by asking you all kind of what your hopes are for the kind of next 12 months within your role in influencing change in this space. And Alex, I'd like to come to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for my hopes for the next 12 months are probably that these kind of conversations continue. So I'm part of a network called Advertising, which is the LGBTQ advertising and marketing network, and it's all about making the industry more inclusive. And the conversations are all about allyship. It's about and also using active allyship to help those who are particularly under fire at the moment within our community, i.e. The trans community. So my hope is that that marketers and brand communications leaders within our sector can start to stand up and start to shift the media narrative and become active allies to parts of our community that need it the most.
Fantastic. Over to you, Pete.
Definitely. With everything that's going on with trans, I definitely agree with Alex. I'd love to see some more visibility for our trans friends. And without sounding like, Gary Lineker, and at the risk of getting fired, maybe a change of government.
With that one,
and over to you, Vanessa.
Yes, I think mine might spark open a can of worms for maybe a future discussion. Mine actually has to do with conflict and conflict resolution and turning it into positive, active change. I know what we have when you have true diversity and intersectionality across the piece, and this is something I'm really wanting to look into, is there is going to be inevitable points of that intersectionality, whether it's religion, ethnicity, race, the woman's issue with the trans challenges. And what's happening at the moment is it's polarizing those views and creating a culture more of hate and disrespect, and social media doesn't help that situation. What I would love us to see in the next 12 months and piloting these discussions, and I had some of these discussions on Women's Day last Friday, is how we understand that conflict is not the issue. Conflict is inevitable, and actually we know some of the top boards have the greatest conflict, but it's the culture, it's our behaviors and how we manage that is it either makes it a positive change or it creates the problem and it creates the division. And so I would love to get to a point where we know how to create a culture and a behavior of whilst having differing opinions across intersectionality, and we get to a kindness and respect culture rather than a division.
And who better to do that than universities, and you and universities, because they are wonderfully diverse and inclusive places. And actually, I'd love to continue this discussion with you. In my head, I'm already thinking, could we do something physically and bring people in the sector and let's have a massive conversation. I've really, really enjoyed this discussion. Thanks so much for your time. I know how busy you all are. And listeners, I hope you've enjoyed it too. And I hope, at the very least, for those listening, it's kind of sparked a bit of some thoughts and interest in how they can incorporate some of those great ideas further. And I just want to say thank you for your time, and look forward to following all of your plans in the future.
Cheers. Thanks, Marcella.